Friday. It is Friday. For those of you who have lost count of what day it is Friday, April 3rd. So I am here. It's been a crazy morning here at our house. So I've been running around a little bit, and I'm just waiting for all of you. Man, there's one. We have one set of eyes. Three. It's so weird that I can see you all coming on. Hi, Pam. How are you, darling? Good to see you this morning. Oh, and Catherine. See, these are the two that are just right on time. You guys are like head of the class. Okay. Well, I am glad we are all here. This is our last reading until Monday. But I'm going to read chapters 24 and 25 today. I've got a lot going on. I don't want to spoil you. You're not always going to get 3 chapters. Today we're just having 2. I wanted to tell you about today's digital resource, which is mariebostwick.com/blog. You should definitely go over to my blog because I put up an additional, I usually only post twice a week. I did a 3rd post this week with a wonderful little recipe for my favorite fish cakes that you can make with canned tuna or canned salmon, and they're really good and they're pantry stuff, and they would be perfect for your Good Friday dinner if that's your tradition to have fish. Another thing I wanted to say to you guys today, because I've been getting a lot of this, it sounds so convincing. Sometimes we get these things that get forwarded to us that say, oh, CNN has just reported, or Dr. Whozitz has just said, or my brother-in-law who works at Johns Hopkins says that drinking water, drinking tea, standing in sunlight, blah, 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 will fix the virus. You know what? Don't forward those things, my friends, because I know they sound true. I've fallen for a couple of them myself, I will say. But if it's like just getting floated around, forwarded on the internet, it's probably not true. And Dr. Whozitz didn't say. So please, disinformation can spread even quicker than this virus. And we need to, not do that, not participate in disinformation. So, and if somebody sends you something, please do not forward it unless you have absolutely heard it from a reliable news source, that you have been on that news source site, not that somebody just said CNN reported. Okay, so will you do me that favor? All right? You're killing me here, Smalls. So wear your mask, stay home. Well, no, don't wear your mask unless you're supposed to. I don't know about masks. Wash your hands, stay home, and don't forward stuff unless it's been confirmed. Okay, that was today's Marie service announcement. Sorry. Shall we read? Let's do. Let me get in here. I'm a little behind today, a little frantic here at our house. Chapter 24, Abigail Burgess Wynne. I stood in front of the refrigerator, surveying the contents and wondering if I should heat up a bowl of leftover vegetable soup before going to Margot's. She would undoubtedly have something delicious to serve, but that was the problem. The holiday revelries had left me 4.5 pounds heavier. When I sat down at my desk the day before to write down my New Year's resolutions, I'd vowed to lose the holiday weight plus another 3.5 pounds besides. At my age, it's important not to let extra weight creep up on you. If a stray pound settles around your middle for more than a week or 2, it can take months to get it back off. I took the soup pot out of the refrigerator and put it on the stove to warm. Liza, dressed in a parka with those big clunky boots I detested, brushed past me and headed toward the back door. Where are you going? Out. I can see that, but you're early. We're not due at Margot's for another 30 minutes. They had a present for me. Wait a minute. I skipped a page. Sorry. And pardon me. Don't touch your face, but I'm going to because I don't have a tissue. Okay, here we are. She fished her gloves out of her pocket, not even bothering to look at me. I'm not going to Margot's. Not going? I sighed, exasperated. Don't you remember? I told you that Margot called right after Christmas. We're going to get together at her house today and work on a new quilt. A present for Evelyn. It's to be a surprise. She said nothing, just zipped up her jacket and pulled on her gloves, getting ready to leave as if she hadn't heard a word I'd said. I was absolutely at the end of my rope with this girl. How much longer was she planning on acting like this? As I'd suspected, Christmas with Liza had been simply awful. I'd gotten up early, made coffee and some hot cider, and heated up the breakfast casserole that Hilda had left for us in the refrigerator. I'd waited nearly an hour for Liza to come downstairs, thinking the delicious aromas from the kitchen would surely rouse her, but they didn't. Finally, I knocked on her door and told her breakfast was ready. She said she was coming, but another hour passed before she finally deigned to grace the dining room with her presence. The casserole was completely dried out. Still, I tried to put a pleasant face on things, ignore her rude behavior, and enjoy the day as best I might. After breakfast, I invited her into the living room and gave her the gifts I'd wrapped and hidden under the tree for her. I hadn't put up a tree in years, but had decided to do so for Liza's sake. I had to admit I enjoyed it. It wasn't a large tree, but it looked so pretty and festive standing next to the fireplace. Just looking at it cheered me. And much to my surprise, I'd also enjoyed shopping for Liza's gifts. Originally, I thought about getting her a cashmere sweater from Kaplan's clothes closet, but recalling her sullen mood of late, felt she might not appreciate my attempts at humor. Instead, I went to Pam's boutique and bought a heavy black knit shawl. Really, it was more of a cape, very warm and very elegant, and a pair of knee-high leather boots with decorative crisscross lacing and black fur edging at the tops. They would look simply wonderful on Liza's tall, willowy frame, simple but dramatic, in line with her personal style, and of course, they were her favorite color, black. I was sure she'd love them. On top of that, I'd purchased one of those tiny music recorder downloader things, the one all the young people had. I got the very latest model, and the most expensive, also in black. Surely, I told myself, when she saw the beautiful present, she'd cheer up. But I was wrong. After opening the gifts, she just mumbled a thank you and returned to her room. So irritating. And what's more, she hadn't even gotten me so much as a Christmas card, let alone a Christmas gift. Not that there was anything I particularly needed or wanted, but you'd have thought she'd have gotten me something. Just a tiny token to thank me for all I'd done for her. After all, if not for me, she might have spent her Christmas behind bars. Sitting alone by the fireplace, listening to a recording of The Holly and the Ivy by a boys' choir, and surrounded by wrapping paper and ribbon debris while Liza was up in her room brooding, I felt hurt and a little lonely. I had thought we might go to the Christmas Day services at church, but now I realized there was no point in asking her to come, and I didn't want to go alone. After tidying up the living room, rinsing the dishes, and leaving the dirty casserole dish in the sink for Hilda to clean when she came in the next morning, I decided to call the shelter and make sure that everything was going well with their Christmas celebration. It was a good thing I did. There was a virus going around, and several of the volunteered to serve dinner had called in sick. I told them I'd come right over. For a moment, I considered inviting Liza to join me, but then I thought better of it. Instead, I left her a note on the counter and hurried over to the shelter. Cutting and serving pieces of pie and whipped cream for the children and parents at the shelter took my mind off my own problems. Bethany came through the line with her mother and little brother. They had a present for me, a small lavender sachet and a card that Bethany had made herself. It wasn't an elaborate gift, but I was touched. After all, it's the thought that counts. The next day, Hilda came into my room holding the music player, the one I'd given to Liza. She said she'd found it in the trash and wondered if I'd accidentally thrown it away. Well, as you can imagine, I was incensed, but I decided not to confront Liza about it. Instead, I told Hilda to take it to her 14-year-old grandson. She, at least, had the courtesy to thank me properly. Liza might be a Burgess, but Hilda could have given her a few lessons in manners. Heaven knew someone needed to, apparently me. Now, as she deliberately ignored me, still wearing those dreadful, clunky hiking boots that she already knew I hated, instead of the expensive, stylish ones I bought precisely because she knew it would annoy me, I decided the time had come to take the bull by the horns. I was not going to tolerate this rudeness for one more moment. Liza, did you hear me? We're supposed to go to Margot's and work on a quilt for Evelyn. Silence. Don't you stand there and pretend you don't hear me, and don't close that And close that door. We've got to go to Margot's. I told you before, I'm not going. Why not? Do you have some more pressing engagement that I don't know about? Are you scheduled to perform brain surgery or something? She mumbled something. What was that? Speak up. I said, she shouted, that it's none of your damn business where I am going and why. I am going out, and that's all you need to know. She opened the door, but I crossed the kitchen in 3 large steps and slammed it shut again. Listen here, young lady, I've put up with enough of this. You are going to Margot's with me, and for once in your miserable, ungrateful, selfish little life, you are going to be pleasant. You're the one who got me into this in the first place. I was perfectly happy with my life, but you blackmailed me into going to that Quilt Pink event and helping Evelyn through her cancer and joining the quilt circle and all the rest. None of this was my idea. But now that we're in it, we're obligated to see it through. You are going with me today, and we are going to work on a quilt to cheer up poor Evelyn. Good heavens, isn't that the least you can do? For all you know, this cancer will prove fatal. Had you even considered that? Honestly, I never met such a rude, inconsiderate, self-absorbed person in all my life. Self-absorbed? Her expression, purposely flat and enigmatic a moment before, suddenly transformed into one of seething and loathing anger beamed directly at me. Her eyes sparkled like firecrackers. Are you... Bad word. I didn't write a bad word. We just did asterisks. Are you blankety-blank kidding me? She asked, using an expletive I prefer not to transcribe. Do you actually have the audacity to stand here and call me self-absorbed? Well, blank you. She tried to push her way past me, but I blocked her. I was determined to finally have this thing out. Don't you dare use that kind of language with me. Not in my home. I simply will not tolerate it. Not after all I've done for you. Liza let out one sharp bark of a laugh. Ha! All you've done for me? What have you ever done for me that the judge didn't make you do? Don't try that one with me. Don't play Our Lady of Mercy and Philanthropy with me, Abigail. I see right through it. The only reason I'm here is because you couldn't figure out a way to get rid of me without making the papers and thus besmirching the precious name of Burgess Wynne. If not for that, you'd have left me to rot in jail. That is not fair and it's not true. I was just trying to help you. Oh, come on. You don't actually believe that, do you? You didn't want to help me. You never want to help anyone unless there's something for you in it. She laughed again, longer this time, but there was no mirth in it, a laugh so infused with hatred that it frightened me a little. I took a step backwards. You are so completely clueless, she spat and moved toward me, but you are right about one thing. I dragged you to the quilt store, blackmailed you into going because I wanted you to have to acknowledge the fact that my mother, your own sister, died of breast cancer and you never, ever did a single thing to help her. You never visited her. You never called her. You never even sent her a blank get well card. She was screaming now, and tears started to fall from her eyes, but there was no hoarseness in her voice, no sound of choked-back sobs, just tears seeping slowly from the corners of her eyes and running down her cheeks, crystalline and bright, catching the light from the kitchen window as if something frozen behind the brown orbits of her eyes were melting. I was so happy to see how miserable you were that day, to see you finally forced out of your perfect little world with your perfect friends and perfect clothes and perfect home, actually having to mix with real people with real problems. And then, when we met Evelyn and you started helping her, I thought, maybe, finally, you were starting to face what you'd done, that you were feeling sad about deserting Mom and me when we needed you most, when we were looking for some way excuse me, and that you were looking for some way to make amends for it. I thought maybe you'd changed. Finally, her fury seemed to subside at least a little. When she said this last, there was a sad, almost mournful tenor to her voice. I said quietly. I have changed. She kept on talking as if I hadn't said anything. And then that night when Evelyn told us that they hadn't gotten all the cancer and you were suddenly so solicitous, so anxious to help, I saw that it wasn't true. You hadn't changed. You just put on another costume, one more layer of veneer to hide what you really are inside, whatever that is. She barked out a bitter laugh. I've lived in your house for months. I'm still not sure who you are. But one thing I do know, you are not sorry about what you did to my mother, not one bit. You just like the idea of this new part you're playing. Abigail Burgess Wynne, compassionate caregiver to the ordinary and the downtrodden. Helping poor quilt shop owners with cancer, taking in ungrateful nieces with criminal records, making quilts for little kids you barely know, serving Christmas dinner to the homeless. She lifted her face and looked at me. The angry spark was rekindled. It'll all look good in your obituary, won't it? Liza, that's awful. What a hateful thing to say. Is it? Good, because I do hate you. I hate everything about you. Your house and your clothes, the sound of your voice, and I absolutely despise the fact that every time I look at you, I see my mother. You look just like her. Did you know that? Like she would have looked if she'd gotten to live to be your age. But when I see you, I remember that she's gone and you're still here. She was good and kind and loved me, and she's dead. You're cold and self-centered, and you only put up with me because you have to, but you are still alive. Why is that? She hates me? How could she, after all I've done? My usual refrain, the one I always played in my mind when working myself into indignation over Liza's behavior and attitude. But then, for an instant, just a breath, everything seemed to freeze. The voice in my head was silenced, and I looked at Liza, truly looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. I looked beyond the angry eyes, the hard-edged clothes and makeup, the sullen attitude, and saw grief, despair, and wrenching loneliness. And I finally realized the truth. At least some of her anguish had been caused by me. All this time I'd been congratulating myself on everything I'd done for Liza, moaning like a martyr about all... Oh, thanks, Mom. She brought me a tissue. Where was I? Moaning like a martyr about all I'd given her. But what had I given her, really? Everything but what she needed. My indignant inner monologue, briefly interrupted, began again, but something had happened. The tirade twisted and turned in my head and became something entirely new, a realization that forbid indignation, pulled me up short, and filled me with shame. After what I've done, and what I've never done, she hates me. How could she not? Tentatively, awkwardly, I took a step toward my niece, my sister's only child, the one person on earth who shared my name, my history, the only human being whose birth and past were connected to mine. I lifted my hand, thinking I should touch her shoulder, but she shrank back from me and wrapped her arms across her heart like a shield. She looked so young. Liza, I'm sorry for... I didn't know what to say, how to begin to apologize. It had been so long since I'd made an apology to anyone, for anything. Never complain, never explain. It was the rule I had lived by all my life. Finally, at a loss, I simply said, "You must miss her terribly." Liza's jaw tightened. She swallowed hard. I could see the muscles twitch under the pale parchment of her long neck. When I went into the quilt shop that day, I only went for one reason, to see you squirm. I didn't care about quilting or even raising money for breast cancer. But then I met Evelyn and Margot, and they were so nice to me, and the quilting part was fun. For a little while, I forgot to think about hating you. And then, when Evelyn fell apart... Her voice trailed off for a moment, remembering that night. For a second, when Evelyn started crying so hard, I was really scared. It was like watching it happen to Mom all over again. But then Margot jumped up and took charge, and next thing I knew, everyone was helping her, even you. And it felt good, you know? It wasn't like it was with Mom, when I was the only one she could count on. Everyone was pitching in, and Evelyn was getting better, and it felt so good. Like I was saying, "Screw you, cancer. You're not going to win this time." And I believed it was true. I really did.
You know, Evelyn is a lot like Mom was, she said in a voice hushed with remembering. Not the way she looks, but the way she talks and acts and everything. Encouraging. Like my artwork. She just let me have that whole window to do whatever I wanted to with. Never told me what to do. She just told me to go for it, she said, shrugging her shoulders ever so slightly, quietly amazed by this vote of confidence in her talent. And she was talented. I could see it. How hard would it have been for me to tell her that? You did a good job, I said. Her tears came faster now, streaming down her cheeks, drawing a transparent line from her lashes to the ledge of her jaw and falling one after another onto her jacket, turning the black fabric even blacker, blooming into an inky, indelible blossom of grief. When we went to the quilt circle that night and she told us the cancer was back and that she was going to have more surgery, I just... She covered her eyes with her hands. I can't do this again. I can't be around her. It hurts too much. I can't be around her or you. I can't, she repeated, and lowered her hands to look at me. Her tears fell like rain as she finally gave up to her hopeless attempts at self-control. Who are you? She sobbed. All of a sudden you can't do enough to help Evelyn or anyone else for that matter. When Mom needed you, you were nowhere to be seen. You never tried to help her. You never pulled strings to get my mother the best doctors in New England, the doctors that might have known how to save her life. Did you ever stop to think about that? You didn't lift a finger to help your own flesh and blood, but when it comes to the needs of strangers, you suddenly can't do enough. How did that happen? This amazing transformation. A magician waves his wand and the old Abigail disappears and poof! Everyone gasps as the new Abigail, looking exactly the same but dressed in an entirely new ensemble, steps out. The audience is dazzled and bursts into applause. She was looking at me again, staring right through me as if I were a ghostly presence composed of nothing more substantial than vapor and suspect intention. You don't fool me, Auntie. Not me. Not any more. You haven't changed anything but your tactics. You've just found a new way to impress everyone. Her voice was thick with loathing. You don't care about Evelyn, she said. You just want everyone to like you, preferably to adore you, without ever letting them get close enough to actually touch you. And the sick part is that they do. Your fancy friends around town, the elegant people who go to the right parties and sit on the right boards are crazy about you because you've got what they want most of all, style. And just having you around makes them feel more clever and important than they really are. But when I forced you to step out of the boundaries of your little club, the crowd of sycophantic disciples who worship you, and into the world where people aren't impressed by cocktail banter or the number of zeros in your checking account, you didn't know what to do. How would you make them like you? You must have racked your brain trying to puzzle that out, didn't you, Abigail? She was wrong. I did care about Evelyn. Maybe not at first, but I did now. Liza kept on without giving me a chance to defend myself. But you're no dummy, she said. Once you figured out what mattered in the new club, things like kindness and generosity, you adapted right away. Overnight you became kind and generous because that's what they wanted. You even started going to church. You're such a hypocrite. You think you're so special, but you're nothing. You don't care about anyone but yourself, not even your dying sister. That's not true. It's not, I insisted. Things aren't as simple and as clear-cut as you've made them out to be. When you're older, you'll understand. A sneer, a voice like ice. Then I pray to God I never live to be that old. Her cutting remarks did just that. Cut me to the heart, wounded me. But I realized that she was hurting too, far more than I. If I could only get her to calm down, to see how unreasonable she was being. I took a deep breath and tried again. Maybe you're right about some of what you've said. I've made my share of mistakes, but... She shook her head and said hoarsely, Be quiet. I don't want to hear it. If I didn't hate you so much, I almost might feel sorry for you. Can't you even see how pathetic you are? God, how did you get to be this way? Liza, I ask myself that question all the time now. When I look in the mirror and see my face, I see you, how you must have looked 40 years ago. Everybody says we look just alike." It was true. I had noticed. "You were like me once. You couldn't have been born this way. Something must have happened to you, but I don't know what. I look at myself and wonder if it's happening to me, too. I'm so afraid." She hadn't said as much to me in the previous 7 months as she had in those few minutes. I didn't know if she truly believed everything she said, but the last part was the absolute truth. She was afraid. She had been for a long time. Liza was only 16 when she'd found out about Susan's cancer, and 18 when she died, far too young to have known such loss. She'd had to face it all alone, with no support or care from me other than the cold comfort of a check. The things that had happened before, the events that had opened the terrible gulf between my sister and me, had swallowed up Liza too, the only innocent person in the whole awful scenario. No wonder she was so hard and mistrustful of me, and everyone else. She'd learned the hard way that even the people who should love you sometimes don't, and even those who do love you will sometimes leave you. The poor child. And now, just when she'd begun to open up, to trust a little, she was facing it all again. How could I not have realized? How could I not have said anything? "Liza, oh, Liza, come here. You don't understand." I reached for her, opened my arms. "Don't!" She jumped back as if burned by my touch. "I told you I can't do this again. I hate you. I hate you," she repeated, once for me and once for herself. "I can't stay here any more." She turned away from me, opened the door, and ran down the steps and across the backyard, leaving a cratered trail of footsteps through the deep drifts of snow. I followed her to the door. "Liza, wait! Where are you going? Come back and we'll talk about it. Come back. I need to explain some things to you." I was yelling as loud as I could, my words ringing through the air, the thin, cold air, my mouth exhaling a frozen fog, but she didn't stop. The snow was at least 2 feet deep, and I was in my stocking feet. I ran upstairs, pulled on the first pair of boots I could find and a warm jacket and gloves, then ran back downstairs and out the back door, but she was gone. I followed her trail of footsteps around the side of the house, down the driveway, and onto the sidewalk. I'd come as quickly as I could, but she was nowhere to be seen, and the sidewalks had been shoveled, leaving only a thin dusting of new snow. The prints of Liza's boots mixed in with the prints of dozens of others who'd walked down the street that day. There was no way to distinguish hers from anyone else's, or to tell which direction she'd taken. I ran to the corner, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, twice slipping and falling on the icy side walkway, and then scrambling back to my feet to continue the hunt, but it was no use. She'd disappeared. I ran back to the house, laboriously making my way through the drifted snow. My heart was pounding in my chest as I climbed the back steps, realizing that I'd left the door wide open. I stood at the doorway, panting from exertion, laid my hand on my pounding heart. Where could she have gone? A voice in my head told me not to worry, that she was just being dramatic, manipulating the situation, trying once again to blackmail me with emotion. But I knew it wasn't true. Not this time. I was worried, afraid of what she might do in such a state. What should I do? Barely pausing to kick the snow off my boots, I walked into the kitchen, trailing snowy, melting footsteps across Hilda's clean floor, picked up the telephone and dialed. "Margot, it's Abigail. No, we're not coming now. Can you come over here? Right away? Please, it's about Liza. I need your help." That is chapter 24. I'm a little worried about her. Let's see what happens, shall we? Chapter 25. Evelyn Dixon. Margot's yellow Volkswagen, parked in Abigail's driveway, appeared trifling and incongruous next to the patrician grandeur of the enormous colonial mansion with its 3 stories of white clapboard siding, 4 chimneys, and symmetrical rows of windows blinking in the winter sunlight like unseeing eyes. Someone had told me that Abigail's house had once been an academy for young women from rich families. It was certainly big enough. Hard to believe that Abigail and Liza lived here all alone. I parked my car behind Margot's and went to the front door. Margot answered. "Hi," she said, giving me a welcoming hug. "Thanks for coming. Abigail's in the kitchen. I made her a cup of tea. She's terribly upset." I followed Margot through a series of cavernous rooms filled with expensive antique furniture, rugs, and paintings. But I was so surprised by Margot's assertion that I barely took note of the elegant surroundings. Abigail upset? That was hard for me to imagine. She always seemed so in control of every situation. I'd never even seen her flustered, let alone upset. But Margot was right. The woman sitting at the table sipping tea with red-rimmed eyes, disheveled hair, and wearing no trace of makeup or lipstick was Abigail. And she was more than upset. She was absolutely distraught. "Margot?" Abigail called. Was that Liza? Is she back?" She looked up hopefully when Margot entered the room, but her face fell when she realized I was the only person following behind. "Oh, it's you, Evelyn. What are you doing here?" "I called her," Margot said. Abigail shook her head. "You shouldn't have bothered Evelyn. She's got enough problems without having to deal with the ones I've created." I pulled up a chair and sat down. "Don't be silly. I'm glad Margot called. Now, what's happening? Liza's missing?" Abigail dabbed her eyes with an already damp tissue. "We had a terrible argument. I knew she was upset about something, but I just kept trying to ignore it. This had been brewing for a long time, years really, even before she came to live with me." Abigail's face crumpled, and she started weeping softly. I was amazed. In all the time I'd known her, I'd never seen her give way to an emotion stronger than carefully controlled disapproval. Now she was sitting here, letting the tears flow freely. I barely recognized her. Whatever had happened between Abigail and Liza, it must have been something big. Otherwise, she would never have allowed herself to be so vulnerable. Margot, normally so capable, was standing near the table, seeming as much at a loss as I was. I looked a question at her, but she just shrugged. "Abigail," I said, "you know that Liza's an emotional girl. Whatever happened between the two of you is probably just a passing cloud. I'm sure she'll come back after she blows off a little steam. Don't worry." "No," Abigail insisted, sniffing. "This wasn't just some little spat. She was furious. We've had our moments, but I've never seen her like this. She walked out that door, and I know she's not planning on coming back." Frankly, I didn't know what to do. Perhaps what Abigail was saying was true, and perhaps it wasn't. But even if she had walked out the door with the intention of never returning, I didn't see what any of us could do about it. Liza was a grown woman. If she didn't want to live with her aunt anymore, and then that was her decision. "I can see how hard this is for you," I said, "but Liza is of age. I'm sure she'll come back once she cools off and thinks things over, but if she doesn't, then that really is her choice. It's difficult to let a child leave the nest, but sometimes that's just what we have to do." "You don't understand," Liza protested. "Liza didn't leave my home. Liza can't leave my home. Not without a judge's permission. If she does, she could end up in jail." Margot's eyes grew wide. "Jail? You mean Liza's on parole? I didn't know that." "Neither did I." Abigail bit her lower lip. I could see she was struggling inside of herself, wondering how much she should tell us, and regretting what she'd already blurted out. Finally, she said slowly, "No, she's not quite on parole. It's just that, well, a few months ago, after her mother died, she made a terrible mistake, and I said I'd be responsible for her. That is, the judge said I had to be responsible for her. I didn't want to at first. I'd barely laid eyes on her before I saw her in Judge Golden's chambers that day. If I could have figured out a way to get out of it, I would have. But now, everything's changed. Do you see?" Margot and I looked at each other. We didn't see. Margot pulled up a chair and sat down. "Maybe you'd better start from the beginning," she said gently. Abigail swallowed hard before speaking. I could see how hard this was for her. Abigail was used to relying on her own resources, and until this moment had been more than equal to the challenge. There is so much to admire about Abigail. She was so competent, intelligent, well-read, well-dressed, socially capable, quick to find the most direct solution to any number of problems. And in the last months, I'd seen her grow in ways I would never have imagined. She was more giving, more sensitive to the needs of others, and it seemed to me happier because of it. But for all this, she was still lacking one important skill, the ability to trust. It obviously did not come easy to her. What had happened to make her so wary of others? Why, whenever I made even the most innocent inquiries about her past, did she so quickly and deftly change the subject? Even after all these months of working together and quilting side by side every week, she was obviously hesitant to open up to Margot or me. Normally, she was able to keep her feelings carefully concealed, but today her emotions were battling inside her. Could she trust us? Should she? She still wasn't sure. I leaned closer and took her hands in mine. "It's all right," I said softly. "You can tell us. After all, we're friends, aren't we?" Her eyes shifted and locked with mine. For one long moment she searched my face, and then, after taking a breath, she began. "Yes," she said tentatively, and then with more conviction. "Yes, I believe we are." Winter days in northern Connecticut are short, and by the time Abigail was finished talking, the shadows of evening were beginning to fall. When she started speaking, I was determined to show as little emotional reaction as possible, so Abigail would feel safe in opening up, but it hadn't been easy. Though she refrained from explaining what caused the rift between them, she told us about her estranged relationship with her deceased sister, and by extension with Liza. No wonder Liza was so hostile toward her aunt. Then she went on to share the truth about Susan's death from breast cancer. It had been hard to hear, frightening. As soon as she'd said the words, Abigail looked at me anxiously, concerned about my reaction to this revelation. With an effort, I urged her to continue. After all, I told myself, this wasn't about me. Not that day. It was about Liza and Abigail. In a strange way, this realization was something of a relief. For so many weeks and months, everyone had been trying to help me, worrying about my needs, my health, my fears, that it felt, well, not exactly good, but somehow right to be worrying about someone else. "Go on," I said in response to Abigail's worried glance. "It's all right." Then what happened? She told us about how Liza had come to be remanded into her custody, about the tension that had been building between the two of them ever since the day I'd told them about my upcoming mastectomy, and finally about the fight they'd had. Awful. Actually, awful didn't even begin to describe it. It broke my heart to hear the hurtful things Liza had said to her aunt. Liza wasn't always pleasant to be around. In fact, she could be a real pain. But she wasn't an intentionally cruel person. I'd always known that the death of her mother had been a terrible blow, but I'd had no understanding of the depth of her suffering. How hard it must have been for her, knowing that I was facing the same disease that had so recently claimed her own mother. A lot of people, having been through what she had, would have immediately backed away, but Liza hadn't. She'd tried to help me in every way she knew how, but it couldn't have been easy, especially when Abigail had used her influence to help me get access to the kind of medical care Liza felt might have saved her mother. Abigail shared that Susan hadn't found out about the cancer until the disease was in its latter stages and had progressed beyond the reach of medical intervention. But you couldn't blame Liza for clutching at straws, looking for a miracle that could have saved her mother, or someone to blame when the miracle hadn't come. Abigail made for an easy target. Poor girl. She was so much kinder than I had imagined, and so much stronger. Still, even a strong person can only shoulder that kind of secret burden of tragedy for so long. When she learned that my first treatment hadn't been successful, that cancer was threatening to take someone else close to her, it had unearthed the grief and anguish she was trying so hard to keep buried. God alone knew the depth of pain Liza was going through. Abigail wasn't faring much better. As I said, there was a lot I admired about Abigail, but I wasn't blind to her faults. Or at least, I hadn't thought I was. Listening to her story, the heartbroken relationship with her sister, the tearful admission that she could never come to her aid, not even after she'd learned about Susan's breast cancer, well, I was in shock. Of course, she'd taken care of Susan's medical bills, had kept tabs on Susan and Liza via the reports she received from her attorney, Franklin Spaulding, and taken financial and eventually physical responsibility for Liza, but still, for someone like Abigail, writing a check was the easiest thing in the world, the equivalent of the average person tossing a quarter to a homeless person without ever bothering to look at them in the eye, done more to assuage their own guilt than as any real act of compassion. How could she have been so completely clueless when it came to the emotional needs of her own niece? How could she, knowing Liza's background, have been so cold? Part of me wanted to reach across the table and slap her. But when I saw her crying openly, bowed down by shame and remorse as she did what was for her the most difficult thing in the world, admit her faults to others, my anger subsided. It was true. The Abigail Burgess Wynne who had been dragged into my shop so many months ago wasn't the same woman who was sitting next to me now. Somewhere along the way, she'd changed, or at least she'd begun to. I'd always thought that somewhere, trapped beneath that hard, proud shell, there was a finer Abigail trying to get out. It seemed she had. As painful as it was, maybe this crisis with Liza, and being forced to hear how much grief she had caused, was the only hammer strong enough to break that shell and finally set Abigail and Liza free. Only time would tell. I ran as fast as I could, Abigail sniffed plaintively, but she was gone. That's when I decided to call Margot. But I didn't mean to bother you, Evelyn. You've got so much on your plate already. Margot broke in and said what I was already thinking. Well, of course I had to call Evelyn. She cares about you just as much as I do, and we all care about Liza. I know. Abigail nodded her head and whispered, I do. I haven't been very good to her up to now, but I do care. If she'll only come home, I know I can figure out a way to make her believe it. I was pleased to hear a little of Abigail's old determination return to her voice. If Abigail decided to do something, then she'd do it. Of course, that didn't solve our immediate problem, as Abigail knew full well. But what if she doesn't come home? I'm just so worried about her. If Judge Goulden calls to check on her if she does something crazy again, and the police pick her up, she'll end up in jail. I was able to pull some strings to help her last time, but I don't think the judge would be lenient if it happened again. It's getting dark outside, and it's so cold. She ran off so fast, she didn't even take her pocketbook with her. I'm sure she doesn't have any money. Abigail buried her head in her hands. This is all my fault, she said for the 10th time that afternoon. I behaved despicably. If only I'd taken time to try to talk to her, to explain things. When she ran out of here, she was completely overwrought. I'm afraid for her. What if she does something crazy? Abigail asked. And I knew she wasn't talking about something as relatively innocuous as shoplifting a sweater or in an unconscious cry for help. Abigail was worried that Liza might give in to her despair and do something much more dangerous and permanent in a much more dangerous and permanent way. What if she tries to? No, I insisted, pushing my chair back and getting to my feet. Liza would never do something like that. Never. I grabbed my pocketbook and car keys off the counter where I'd left them. Come on, let's go. Where? Abigail asked. Her eyes grew wide as she watched me put on my jacket. Evelyn, you can't go to the police and tell them Liza is gone. I told you, she'll go to jail if they find out. I know that, I said. We're going to have to find her ourselves. She was on foot, and she didn't have any money. She can't have gone far. I zipped up my jacket and started giving instructions. Margot, you and Abigail go together. Start on the east side of town. I'll take the west. We'll cover more ground if we split up. That is the end of chapter 25, and that is where we are going to leave off today, my dear friends. Thank you for joining me. I have had a very busy morning, so I didn't have much chance to read, but I do like to share a Bible verse with you, something for you to think about this weekend. I know, as this goes on, I know that a lot of us are filled with doubt and fear and anxiety, so here is something to think about from Psalm 27, verse 1. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? The answer Nothing. Don't be afraid, my friends. And if you start to feel afraid, pick up a book, give somebody a call, reach out. I know it's hard, but aren't we blessed to have the internet and telephones so we can reach out to each other? I hope you do that this weekend. I will see you on Monday, my darlings. Thank you for joining me.